Good evening, and welcome to Hello, It's Us, Perspectives on Inclusion. This program is dedicated to educating the general public about issues that are important to people with disabilities, and we firmly believe that those of you viewing this will recognize that those issues are of importance to the public at large because people with disabilities certainly are a part of the general public. Hello, It's Us, Perspectives on Inclusion is brought to you through a collaboration between the University of Iowa Center for Disabilities and Development, Uptown Bill's Coffee Shop, and our good friends here at Public Access TV. Those of you that are viewing this will notice a little change. Generally, my co-host and co-founder of Hello, It's Us, Keith Ruff, is in studio with me. He had an obligation this evening, and so I'm going to be solo with our guest, and so you'll have to bear with me. Keith is our stalwart co-host, and so we'll do our best to stand in for him this evening. So my name is Mike Honig. I am a co-host, as I mentioned, of Hello, It's Us. I work for the University of Iowa Center for Disabilities and Development as a program coordinator. And I'm very pleased this evening to welcome back Jessica Gallegos. She was our guest a week ago when we talked about cultural competence, just diversity in general, talked about defining it. So we're very glad to have you back, Jessica, so welcome aboard.
Thank you. Thank you for having me again.
Thanks for coming back. And Jessica is I'll let you tell. I will say that she is a recent graduate of the University of Iowa. Social work, right? That was your major. And I just learned this evening, actually, that she has some exciting news that I hope she'll be willing to share about a new job opportunity.
Yeah, I actually will be working at the Center for Disabilities and Development, hopefully soon. The details are still in the works, but I'll be working with the Center for Disabilities and Development and then also Child Health Specialty Clinic, so it'll be a dual position. But I'm really excited to get to work with you and everybody over at the CDD.
Well, we're glad to have you, and I assume a lot of your work will be in promoting diversity and incorporating diversity into some of our programs.
Definitely, and in outreach as well within the community. So
awesome.
Yeah.
Well, we're really looking forward to having you. We, as I mentioned, our first visit with Jessica, we spent a lot of time talking about cultural competence and really kind of defining what that is and what that means here in Iowa, because we tend oftentimes to think of ourselves as not really being a very diverse state. And Jessica so correctly pointed out that we are diverse. Our numbers are within diversity are increasing, and I think we are fortunately recognizing that diversity comes in many, many forms, so it has much more to do with skin color and even culture. So this is very much of an appropriate topic. It's timely, and so we're glad to have you back. We're going to move into talking about some cultural exchange work that Jessica has been involved with. We talked a little bit during our last program and on previous shows about a leadership education in neurodevelopmental and related disabilities program that Jessica participated in called ILEND, the Iowa ILEND program. She served as a trainee there, and I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the exchange program which you were involved with was directly connected to the ILEND project, or the ILEND program, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. So it involved working with a program in Puerto Rico, and I would like you to walk us through how the program got started and where the idea came from, and just we'll jump off from there.
So actually a few years back, there was this great psychology ILEND trainee named Janice, and she was actually from Puerto Rico, and she still has family there, and she really wanted to bring ABA, so applied behavioral analysis, to Puerto Rico because she sees it as sees the benefits of the therapy. And she stayed in touch with the ILEND program in Iowa throughout her career, and she wanted to continue. She really wanted to make this goal a reality, of bringing ABA programming and educating on ABA programming to the island. And because she had this prior connection with the ILEND program, and because at the time there was a push for creating more ties with the Puerto Rico USED, or the, what is that? Do you remember what it stands for?
The University Center for Excellence in Developmental Disabilities.
So they don't have a ILEND program there, but they have a USED.
Oh.
And we saw the benefits of really helping her with her goal. And then also we realized that this was a great opportunity for cultural exchange. So we could learn from Puerto Rico, and Puerto Rico could learn from us. It wasn't just a one-way street. And so that's kind of how it came about. It came about very quickly, and it happened very quickly, but it was a great experience.
So you actually went to Puerto Rico, you and a group of, did all the ILEND trainees go, or was
No, it was a group of, I believe, 6 of us.
Okay.
Yeah.
And part of what you did was to go talk with them about applied behavior analysis training, or was it more general? Your visit down there was more general, kind of an exchange.
It was more a general trying to understand more about how they do diagnosing.
Okay.
And just understanding just how their USED works. So it functions very differently than ours does. It's a daycare instead of it's not the CDD, it's not a clinic, it's a daycare. And one of the hospitals then kind of partners with it and allows some of their practitioners to then work with that daycare center, and then they do evaluations of the daycare.
So they're mostly working with kiddos then?
Yes, they are.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that is very different.
It is very, very different.
And whereas we do a lot of technical assistance and things with professional, do they do some work with training professionals like in schools and in early childhood programs, or does that model not so much exist?
That model doesn't really exist in Puerto Rico. And I think that as we start talking about Puerto Rico in general, it'll kind of become clear why it doesn't.
Well, I wanted to get back to something you said that I think is really important. You said that when you went down there, you really had to go with the mindset that this is not about us going in and talking to Puerto Ricans about how they needed to provide services or the model that they needed to set up there, because they have their own culture, their ways of doing things, and things that make sense to them that we may, looking through a lens of somebody that's been born and raised in Iowa, may not make as much sense. But obviously you went in with an open mind. I was fortunate enough to go to Yucatan. I studied there in Mexico for 3 months, and then I went back as through an exchange program somewhat similar to what you did. And that was one of the things that that was stressed to me before I ever got on that plane, was that you can't go in there and say you need to do it this way. And boy, that rang true so quickly. I mean, when we started, I did make the mistake a couple of times of saying, well, this is what we do back home. And they said, well, we're in a different place and time here.
Yeah.
So what were, one of the things you had given me when we had a chance to talk about a little of some of these things ahead of time, that some of the examples that when you went down there, that some of the things that you learned or observed just that are a little bit, maybe not a little bit, but that are different ways of doing things, different models of providing services by healthcare professionals there that you were able to bring back here, that you said, oh gee, I didn't maybe realize that before.
Yeah. So the one thing, well, first of all, I think most of the things that we saw were really positive in our experiences with getting to watch different practitioners work. And it wasn't, again, like what you said, it wasn't like, oh, we do this, and therefore it's wrong, what you're doing. But there was For example, we got to sit in on an evaluation of a little girl, and it was a developmental evaluation. And we got to actually be in the room as they were doing the evaluation, which is practically unheard of here at the CDD. You sit outside of the two-way wall or two-way window. You're not in the room, and it was a really full room. The parents were there, both parents, mom and dad, the developmental pediatrician, her resident, a regular pediatrician, general pediatrician, 6 of us from Iowa, a social worker, a speech pathologist, and then the little girl. We're all in there together. So needless to say, it was a little crowded in there. But not only did that model kind of help us see how she interacted with her parents, but it also helped the practitioners understand how she interacted with a large group of people, which is not something that you get in a developmental evaluation at the CDD, because you're not a big group of people. You're maybe 1 or 2 people in the room. And it helped them also see how she interacted with strangers. So it was a really great way to...
It's much more holistic than maybe what we're used to.
Exactly, yeah. And the informality, I think, really helped learn more about the little girl than if it was a formal evaluation. And it was an informal evaluation. I really... that's kind of at least how I saw it. So I have to remember that that's just my perspective, and they might see it differently. But the practitioners were simultaneously doing this evaluation and getting to know the family. And they were laughing with the family, and they were putting them at ease, because developmental evaluations are not... When you say that you're going to have if your child's going to have a developmental evaluation, it kind of indicates that there might be something there that needs to be identified. And so that can cause a lot of anxiety with families. And I think laughing with the family and talking to them really put them at ease, and they really tried to create a relationship with the family, which was very different than what we might see at the CDD, for example.
Now, would these be people, since it was a developmental evaluation, the developmental pediatrician may or may not see that family again? Would it likely be a long-term relationship that they would have with that family, or just depending on what the results were? Depending on what the results were,
but for in this case, it was not going to be a long-term relationship. So they really they tried to create a relationship even though they knew that they might not be seeing them again.
That's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it actually is kind of amazing, when you use the word informality, that's what I was thinking of when the fact that you were allowed to be in there, because, you were visiting from somewhere, and I don't think that would just be done here, at CDD or many other places. So I think that speaks to just trying to really keep it at a more, at least from what we would see it as a more informal process. And did the family respond pretty well?
The practitioners asked the family if it was okay that we came in, and they had absolutely no problem with it whatsoever. And they were talking to us. I mean, it was Janice and I that were the only 2 that spoke Spanish, so we had to translate. We had to interpret everything. But they were asking us questions throughout this assessment, and we got to be part of the relationship too. It wasn't just that we were sitting there and we were watching it. They also interacted with us, which was really cool, because it's unheard of at the CDD.
That is so. Well, maybe hopefully you'll be able to bring some of that knowledge back to us and actually apply it. I think that I would guess anyway that was just that relationship building allowed for a better flow of communication between the family and the healthcare team then too.
Definitely, because they were more willing to share things. And I think that there was also the opportunity that if they forgot something later, they didn't feel embarrassed or ashamed that they had forgotten it. They could say it later on.
That's so good.
Which, sometimes doesn't happen in a more formal
No, it doesn't. And not just in the world of developmental pediatrics. I mean, I think about my own healthcare appointments when I've had to go in for a new diagnosis and advice on treatment, you feel like you'd better get it said right now,
Exactly.
or then it's otherwise it might be too late. So, well, that's really great that you had that opportunity. One of the things that we had a conversation about during one of our previous ILEND episodes was policy and just implementation of policies that hopefully are going to improve access for people with disabilities. And you and I had a chance to talk a little bit off air before the show was filmed about just the infrastructure in Puerto Rico isn't just exactly in place to be able to implement a lot of the policies that we sort of take for granted in terms of improving access for people with disabilities in the United States, whether it's laws or services. So would really like it if you could talk about some of those barriers to infrastructure and then how that relates to services or access that may be much less attainable to people with disabilities and their families in Puerto Rico.
So when I say infrastructure, I mean the physical infrastructure, so like roads and sidewalks. But no, I also mean the economic infrastructure, so that the ability to put services into place. So I mean both. And we often don't think about our physical infrastructure as being, we do think of it as a barrier, but in Puerto Rico it's even more of a barrier. The streets are buckled, the sidewalks are buckled. Sometimes there aren't those lips in the sidewalks to be able to cross. Sometimes we have, the majority of the time, we have our sidewalks measured out so they're all the same height. That's not the case all the time in Puerto Rico. Sometimes they're higher, sometimes they're lower, and it's hard to gauge if they're constantly changing. So that's one issue, so the physical infrastructure. Sure. But while the ADA laws and regulations apply to Puerto Rico, there isn't any money to put that into the physical infrastructure or the services that we would provide. And I'm not sure if you've heard, but Puerto Rico declared a type of bankruptcy back, so it'll be a month ago. Wow. In early May. And this was not a new thing by any means. Puerto Rico was struggling with its debt for a while. But prior to this, there was a regulation in place that stated that Congress wouldn't allow Puerto Rico to declare bankruptcy. So their debt just kept piling on. And they had tried to declare bankruptcy before. But they're about $123 billion in debt right now. Oh, my. And it's the first time a U.S. state or territory has ever taken this extraordinary of a measure. And Puerto Rico, I think a spokesperson from Puerto Rico literally said it's unable to provide its citizens effective services. So we're not just talking about individuals with disabilities, we're talking about all of the citizens of Puerto Rico because of its crushing weight of the debt. So they can't implement ADA and those regulations because they don't have the money for it. And they can't provide services to any of their citizens, let alone those with disabilities. That really struck me, is that we can't provide anybody these services. And what eventually will happen is they'll go through a court process that allows Puerto Rico to pay off its debt, but it'll then mean that the island will become solvent, and the government workers probably will forgo their pension money, the public health and the infrastructure that we were talking about before. Those projects won't happen, so they won't fix the roads or they won't fix the sidewalks. And then what's called brain drain is going to happen on the island, and people are going to leave. So we're trying to create a program in Puerto Rico that teaches, or that'll help put into place an education system where we can do ABA services. But if everyone leaves, who are we supposed to teach?
Oh, that is a huge development, and it just it almost becomes a hierarchical thing. Where you start. We here in the United States, if there's there's not a curb cut or there's a bad sidewalk, you just go to the city or whoever is responsible for implementation and say, well, this needs to be fixed. And with this bankruptcy, I mean, it sounds like just even the basic provision of services, and when the evaluation that you were talking about a little while ago, I don't know what that particular family situation was, but anybody who needs support to have those kinds of evaluations done probably may not have access to those. Will it get that severe? Or?
Well, you said in Puerto Rico exist anymore. Will they be able to provide those services anymore? So that brings up a really, so on that micro level, what we were able to see, we would see the effects of the policies even more in the relationship that our ILEND program has with Puerto Rico, because they might not even have the ability to serve patients in that space.
Could the U.S. federal government choose to intervene? I just don't know how that. This is new territory for me, obviously, but could that be an option?
They could. I don't think they're going to. Just the way the political rhetoric is going right now, and I'm not sure that. And this is my opinion. I'm not sure that Puerto Rico would want them to intervene, because there's a lot of what would it mean? What would they take away? What would they come in and try to run Puerto Rico, or what? You know what I mean? What are the implications of getting help? Would there be different things in place that they would say, like, well, this has to happen, otherwise you won't get the help that you need? Oh,
yeah, and I could certainly see why that they would not want that.
Yeah, and culturally too, that the U.S. might say, like, you need to do it this way, and that's not very culturally competent.
No. Just as we would not like it if somebody came in and tried to tell us how we were going to run our healthcare system, that's a very unfortunate development, I think. I mean, because it just really further compromises what people might be able to access, not just disability related, but just in general.
In general, yeah.
Well, in our last few minutes, I wanted to kind of bring this all back to some applications of services to one particular population, and this is not at all, I wanted to do this more as kind of an example to illustrate just some cultural differences, and hopefully this will be something that, as those of you out there watching and listening realize that this is, one of many, many cultures, but I do know that there are some particular services that are available even locally for Latinos. And so I wanted to ask Jessica to talk a little bit about that, but before we get into talking about those services, I'm wondering if you could, just in terms, and as I said, this is to provide an example of how cultural differences come into play. When a person, let's just use the Latino culture as an example. Let's say that a healthcare provider, a social service provider, is talking with a family about a new diagnosis that is new to the family for a child. Are there things that that someone, and you had talked about Mexico earlier, so let's just use that as an example. Are there some things that family that might be running through their head just because of, of cultural perceptions of disability that we might, as Americans, we might not think of that as a healthcare professional or social service professional that would help to be aware of?
So I think the first thing would be maternal blame, that the mom might get blamed by the family for this happening, or the community. But when I say that, I also want to backtrack and talk a little bit about this idea of feminismo. So I think it's one of the most beautiful things about the Mexican culture, that exists within different Latino cultures in general. But Latinos and Mexicans, they tend to be group oriented. So there's a strong emphasis placed on the family as a major source of one's identity and protection against life's hardships. So
that is a beautiful thing, by the way.
It's very beautiful. And this sense of family belonging, it's really intense, and it's not just limited to family, to blood relatives. It's also sometimes friends and people that are close to you. And so people who are not family aren't usually given trust. So that when we were talking, if we go back to the Puerto Rico example, that family really talking to us and getting to know the practitioners, that was a way of gaining trust. So incorporating that into our thought process is really helpful. But the family model also means that it's not just the nuclear family, it's the extended family as well. So we're talking about grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins, so everybody. And it also can mean financial support. So if they're going into a healthcare system, that their family might be helping them in that way. But that also means that decisions about behaviors or whatever they're going to do are largely based on pleasing the family in general. And then decisions are also shared. So the family makes a decision together.
So it may take a longer period of time.
Exactly.
So if you're, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. That was exactly what I was going to say.
So if you're a social worker, as an example, and a decision is going to be made about maybe school programming or particular medical treatment that you might want to ask them to go for a consult with, it might not just be, okay, let's set that up for a week or two. It may be a process where the extended family is involved, and then we'll reach a decision that may not necessarily even be the one that the healthcare provider, social worker, whomever would agree with.
Exactly. So it might mean that, just the parents are there and they're at this evaluation, or they're with the social worker, and they have to go home and talk to their family about it. So it might not even happen in that day that a decision will be made. But you also see that sometimes extended family comes with to an appointment. And so that's an important thing to remember too, that that space for talking as a family is really important. So allowing that is definitely a benefit to working with a family that might be coming from Mexico or might be of some Latino culture.
And so embracing that as a healthcare provider would really would help to develop that trust.
Exactly.
So, and I think that with the family support, it sounds like those informal networks are important. I believe I've heard that there is a social or a family support network here locally in Johnson County.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about that?
So that support group has been around for quite a while, and it started at the Therapy Center, Children's Center for Therapy. Yep. It's called Manantial, and it's now a part of Child Serve in Iowa City. And it's a Spanish-speaking support group, so it doesn't necessarily mean that just Mexican families can go to it. It's for Spanish-speaking families in general. And it's really grown within the last few years, and it's been a really important, I think, thing for the Iowa City Latino disability community.
Oh, that's great.
So there's a subset of the disability community, and I think that was really important, that it just gave, it's a lot of moms, actually, and they do a lot of different things. They cook together, they talk like every week. It's a space that they can sit down and talk, and it's not your typical support group where, for example, a social worker might be sitting there and running the conversation. It's very family driven, so those moms drive it themselves. Yeah.
Sounds like a great connection. And so if people want to get involved, locally, they would contact the Child Serve office.
Yes, it's also online. I know that they have a Facebook page,
Cool.
Montiel.
Well, as I mentioned at the end of our last show, the time always just flies by, and I have thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. I have been fortunate to do some cross-cultural exchange, and it's just so great to see you're sharing your wisdom and getting involved with it at so many levels, and that you're coming to work with CDD. So I want to thank you, Jessica, for joining us. I want to thank all of our viewers out there for tuning in. And of course, want to thank our sponsors for helping to make this show happen every month. So on behalf of Keith Ruff, who will be back next time, I want to thank everyone and wish everyone a great week.